Have you ever felt life was moving you instead of you moving through life? Meet Eli, a man learning the hard way that peace doesn't come from controlling the world, it comes from controlling your response to it. Stay with this story until the end, and you'll discover the exact moment he learns to let go of what he cannot control and finally finds true inner calm. Listen closely. The lesson could change the way you face your own challenges. Eli woke to the muted hum of the city outside his window. The early morning light diffused through thin clouds. His apartment felt unusually heavy, as if the walls themselves were pressing, waiting for him to acknowledge what had happened. The phone call from yesterday lingered in his mind, a whisper of upheaval that refused to dissipate. A major life-changing decision had been made for him, and not once had anyone sought his input. The news, sharp and uncompromising, had dragged him into a current he could not resist. In the hours that followed, Eli felt the familiar thrum of helplessness. His chest tightened, thoughts spiraled, and his hands clenched without awareness. Every fiber of his body seemed to rebel against a world that had, once again, placed him in a position of forced compliance. The city outside continued its rhythm, distant sirens, the muted roar of buses, and the occasional shout of a street vendor. Life moved forward, indifferent to his internal tumult. He dressed slowly, methodically, though each movement carried the weight of thought. His coat felt heavier than it had yesterday, each button and zipper a reminder of the limitations imposed upon him. Yet, even amid the pressure, he noticed small things. The chill on his fingertips as he tied his shoes, the muted scent of coffee from a neighboring apartment, the faint vibration of a passing train through the floor. It was in these details that he found the first threads of awareness, small, almost imperceptible, but present. By mid-morning, Eli was walking through the streets, the city sprawling and alive around him. Crowds moved with their own purposes, oblivious to the storm inside him. Commuters clutched coffee cups, briefcases, earbuds, and expressions that ranged from fatigue to determination. A child held his mother's hand tightly, eyes wide at the honking cars. A street musician plucked guitar strings, playing a melody that seemed both mournful and serene. In this ordinary chaos, Eli noticed a subtle pattern. Life moved forward, inevitably, and people navigated pressures of their own. Some stumbled, some flowed with a strange grace. He paused at a crosswalk, observing a man juggling packages and a phone call, his expression tight, but his movements deliberate. In that brief observation, Eli felt a flicker of recognition. Perhaps control is less about the external circumstances and more about the choices within them. He had been caught so many times by what he could not change, yet here, in a crowded street, he glimpsed a quiet autonomy, a freedom that did not depend on circumstance. Eli continued walking, his shoes splashing through puddles from an earlier drizzle. The rain had stopped, leaving streets slick and reflective. Storefronts mirrored the overcast sky, and the city appeared both familiar and strangely distant. He could have rushed, moved faster, sought distractions, but instead he slowed, observing. Each movement became deliberate, the lift of his foot, the sway of his coat, the rhythm of breath. In slowing, he found a measure of calm. By late morning, he reached a small park tucked between two buildings. The grass was damp, and the benches bore the imprint of earlier visitors. He chose one, settling with a sigh that carried more than just physical relief. It was the unburdening of accumulated tension. Around him, life continued. Pigeons pecked at scattered crumbs, joggers passed in steady rhythm, an older woman fed a stray cat with practiced patience. In this microcosm, he felt a quiet reflection arise. Impermanence is everywhere. Clouds pass, rain ends, birds move on, and humans continue. Why then should he be dragged so violently by what is beyond his control? A soft drizzle began again, and Eli did not move. He simply felt the rain on his skin, listened to the patter on leaves, and noted the sound of water splashing against sidewalks. His mind, usually a torrent of reactive thoughts, began to slow. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside, but here, for the first time that day, the storm could exist without consuming him. It came, it fell, it passed, and he remained. The hours that followed were quieter, though not without internal resistance. He returned to his apartment, made a simple lunch, and sat at his kitchen table. He noticed the clink of utensils, the subtle aroma of cooking, the muted city sounds through the window. Each act, each observation, became a gentle exercise in presence. Even the discomfort of forced circumstance became a point of attention rather than panic. He realized that while he could not control the decision imposed upon him, he could control how he experienced it, how he responded, and how he moved forward. The afternoon brought a small, unexpected challenge. A minor disagreement at work, an email that misrepresented his position arrived. In the past, Eli would have felt an immediate surge of defensiveness, anxiety, and irritation. Today he paused. He reread the email, considered the facts, and drafted a response that was calm, clear, and deliberate. He noticed the subtle relief in his chest as he hit send, the absence of spiraling judgment that usually followed such interactions. Even in minor events, he could exercise control. By evening, the weight of the day had lessened, though not disappeared. Eli walked along familiar streets, observing reflections in puddles, noticing the subtle changes in light as the sun began to lower. Streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows and pools of warmth on sidewalks. He passed a small cafe where laughter and conversation spilled into the street, and he recognized a pattern of choice again: joy, frustration, calm, panic. They were often decisions, not inevitabilities. He had felt the tug of the current all day, yet he also felt the first stirrings of autonomy. Night settled quietly. Eli returned to his apartment, drew a cup of tea, and sat by the window. The city's distant lights reflected in the glass, a mosaic of motion and stillness. Thoughts of the morning's news returned, but he met them differently this time. Instead of resistance, he observed. The facts were immutable. The decision had been made. He could not change the past, nor the imposition of circumstance. But he could choose his response, his focus, and his action going forward. Even in helplessness, he discovered a subtle, profound freedom, the ability to act within the sphere of control he still possessed. Hours passed, and Eli's breathing settled into a steady rhythm. The storm of the day's emotions had not vanished entirely, but it had changed form. No longer a tide dragging him against rocks, it was now a wave he could ride or release. Awareness, presence, and deliberate observation became the tools of survival, the instruments of a freedom he had long denied. He closed his eyes briefly, feeling the weight lift slightly, not removed entirely, but managed, contained, and understood. Sleep arrived with a quiet inevitability. Dreams carried fragments of the day, city streets, rain, emails, voices. Yet there was a calm thread running through them, a subtle awareness that had not been present before. Even in the unconscious state, the practice of noticing, choosing, and releasing had begun to root itself. Eli slept, not untroubled, but steadier than he had in months. Morning would come again, and with it, new challenges, fresh currents, and unfamiliar pressures. But he had discovered, in the ordinary cadence of a single day, the subtle principle that would guide the next. While he could not control the currents of life imposed upon him, he could control the rhythm of his own mind, the deliberate movement of his own action, and the measure of calm that accompanied each choice. And so, the awakening had begun. Not in grand gestures or dramatic insight, but in the quiet observation of city streets, the gentle patter of rain, the deliberate response to minor conflict, and the awareness that freedom begins where choice begins. The first half of part 1 closed with that seed, planted quietly, ready to grow as Eli continued his journey through a world of pressures, expectations, and the constant interplay of control and surrender. The next morning, Eli awoke with the soft glow of dawn spilling through his blinds. The city was quieter now, the distant hum of traffic a muted accompaniment to his thoughts. The previous day's turbulence lingered, but it no longer pressed as urgently against his chest. He moved deliberately, noticing each muscle as he stretched, each sensation as he showered, each breath as he drew in the cool morning air. It was a small act of reclamation, the first moments under his control, chosen fully. He brewed coffee, savoring the aroma as it rose in the kitchen. The steam warmed his face, the warmth of the cup seeped into his hands. He noticed the rhythm of pouring, the gentle clink of the spoon, the quiet hiss of the milk frother. Ordinary actions, once automatic and unremarkable, now became deliberate practices of awareness. Each motion was an assertion of agency in a life that had so often imposed choices on him. Stepping outside, Eli wandered through the streets with no destination in mind. The city offered itself as a living reflection of constant motion and impermanence. People hurried past, heads down, earbuds in, eyes locked on screens. Others moved with intention, carrying themselves with quiet confidence that seemed almost invisible but undeniably present. He watched, noting the difference between those swept along by circumstance and those who seemed to navigate life deliberately. A street musician played a soft, repetitive melody on a guitar. Eli paused, listening fully, feeling the vibration of the strings through his chest. For a moment, he allowed himself to observe the scene without judgment. The musician's fingers, the expressions of passers-by, the interplay of sound and environment. He realized that while he could not control the world around him, the decision thrust upon him, the unpredictable rhythm of life, he could control his attention. He could choose where to place his focus, what to notice, and how to respond internally. By late morning, Eli found himself in a small park he had never truly appreciated before. The air was damp from a recent rain, the scent of wet earth mingling with the faint aroma of blooming flowers. He took a seat on a bench, watching leaves quiver in the wind. Each small movement, each minor detail, became a focal point for deliberate observation. He felt a subtle shift, the recognition that external events were neutral. It was only his judgments, reactions, and attachment that carried weight. For hours, Eli wandered and observed, reflecting quietly. He recalled moments throughout his life when he had been swept along by circumstance, when anger, frustration, or fear had dictated his actions. The memories were vivid: arguments with colleagues, disagreements with friends, missed opportunities he had blamed on others, not on his own perceptions. Slowly, he began to trace the patterns of reaction that had constrained him for decades. Each reflection, gentle and non-judgmental, offered insight into the ways his mind had surrendered agency to events beyond his control. Lunch was simple, eaten at a cafe with large windows overlooking a bustling street. Eli watched pedestrians, noticing the ebb and flow of human activity. He observed a mother gently coaxing her child to keep pace, a man carrying multiple shopping bags without apparent strain, a young woman laughing on the phone with a friend. Each moment, each fragment of life, offered insight. People navigate pressures continuously, but it is the internal response that dictates suffering or calm. Returning home, Eli took a notebook from his desk. He had long resisted journaling, dismissing it as trivial, but today he felt compelled to record his observations. He wrote not prescriptions, but reflections, small notes on choice, observation, and the neutrality of events. He did not attempt to solve life, nor dictate rules for living. He merely observed the subtle currents within himself. With each sentence, each line, he felt a faint relief, as if the act of noticing itself created a space of control he had not known before. The afternoon brought its first small test. An email arrived from work, detailing a sudden adjustment to a project he had been managing. In the past, he would have immediately felt tension and panic, imagining worst-case outcomes. This time he paused. He reread the message slowly, noted what he could influence, and identified areas where he had no control. He drafted a response carefully, focusing only on actionable items, then stepped away. He watched the sunlight on the windowsill, letting the tension dissipate before returning to tasks. The subtle power of responding deliberately, rather than reacting reflexively, became clear. Evening descended with a quiet intensity. Eli walked through his neighborhood as streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across wet sidewalks. Each puddle reflected distorted images of neon signs, passing pedestrians, and the faint glow of traffic. He noticed patterns of movement, a dog trotting beside its owner, a delivery cyclist navigating between cars, a group of teenagers laughing while playing basketball in an empty lot. Each observation reminded him, the world moved with its own rhythms, indifferent to his preferences or frustrations. Yet within it, his mind could still claim sovereignty, choosing calm over panic, deliberate action over reactive impulse. At home, he prepared a simple dinner. The act of chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, and cleaning utensils became an exercise in attention. Each motion, precise and deliberate, reaffirmed a principle slowly embedding itself. Control lies not in the external world, but in the sphere of one's own choices. Even as the weight of the life-altering decision persisted, he discovered that his responses could be measured, intentional, and composed. Night offered quiet reflection. Eli sat by the window with a cup of tea, observing distant city lights shimmering in puddles below. Thoughts of the day's experiences surfaced, yet he met them differently than before. The initial shock, the frustration, the helplessness, they were acknowledged, accepted, and released. Awareness of impermanence allowed him to understand that all events, no matter how sudden or unwanted, pass. His inner state, when guided by choice and reflection, need not be disturbed. Sleep arrived, and with it, another subtle lesson. Even amidst imposed decisions, deliberate attention and awareness create a space of internal freedom. Eli felt the faint stirrings of what he had begun to practice, choosing responses, focusing on what was within control, and releasing what was not. The seed had been planted, and though small, it held the promise of growth. Eli's first full day of deliberate observation and reflection closed with a quiet sense of calm. The city, once oppressive, now offered itself as a teacher. Rain, sunlight, passerby all neutral. His judgments, his responses, his attention, his choice. In the hours ahead, he would continue testing this principle, seeking both failures and subtle victories in ordinary life. And in these small, repeated exercises, the foundation of awareness, autonomy, and inner peace would grow steadily, imperceptibly, yet irrevocably. The morning light filtered softly through Eli's blinds, carrying with it the subtle rhythm of the city awakening below. He lay in bed for a few moments longer than usual, allowing the hum of distant traffic, the murmur of early pedestrians, and the occasional shout of street vendors to seep into consciousness. This small pause had become a ritual of sorts, a deliberate act of observation before the day's currents swept him along. He noticed the pull of old habits, the tension in his shoulders, the racing of thoughts, but he observed these without judgment, acknowledging their presence, letting them pass. Breakfast was quiet. A slice of toast, butter melting slowly into its surface, a cup of black coffee releasing steam into the cool kitchen air. He moved deliberately, savoring each motion, spreading the butter, stirring the coffee, the tactile warmth of the mug against his palms. These ordinary acts, once performed automatically, were now infused with intention. The world continued its rush outside, but within the small space of his apartment, he had established a locus of choice. Stepping into the street, Eli felt the familiar pull of external pressures, emails, messages, appointments, responsibilities, but he greeted each sensation with a quiet pause. Instead of reacting, he observed which matters were within his control, which were not, and what action, if any, could he deliberately take. This simple separation, repeated throughout the day, became an anchor, a subtle thread connecting thought to action, awareness to choice. The park offered its usual refuge. Birds moved among the trees, chirping softly, while joggers passed in steady rhythm. Eli noticed the intricate interplay of motion, the sway of branches in the wind, the glint of sunlight on leaves, the reflection of puddles from last night's rain. Each detail became a point of observation, a reminder that life moves forward, indifferent to preference or judgment. His attention, however, was his own. He could choose what to notice, what to react to, and what to let slip past unnoticed. A jogger passed and nearly collided with him. In the past, Eli's instinct would have been irritation, words bristling, the body tensing in immediate defensiveness. Today, he stepped aside, smiled faintly, and continued observing. The choice was subtle, almost invisible, yet it carried a quiet weight. The moment of freedom lies in the space between stimulus and response. He had exercised it, and in doing so, he felt the first faint echo of liberation. Returning home, he found a note slipped under his door, a reminder of a bill overdue, a request from a neighbor, and a minor work-related notice. Each could have sparked anxiety, a cascade of internal dialogue insisting on urgency and panic. Instead, Eli paused. He cataloged each item, which required action, which could wait, which lay beyond influence. He acted deliberately on the things within reach, released the rest, and felt the tension ease. This act, repeated countless times in the small hours of urban life, was becoming a practice, a form of quiet mastery over self rather than the world. Lunch was taken at a small cafe, familiar yet unnoticed until now. Eli observed those around him, a woman speaking on the phone with calm authority, a man reading a newspaper and sipping espresso with methodical patience, a pair of friends laughing softly over shared stories. Each person, navigating their own pressures, offered lessons in silent agency. He considered the patterns of their behaviors, reflecting on his own reactions to life's currents. What did he control? What was dictated by circumstance? The distinction, though simple in theory, was subtle and demanding in practice. The afternoon brought a minor irritation, an unexpected change in a meeting schedule. Previously, such disruptions would have sparked internal turmoil, frustrations spilling outward in sighs, terse emails, or prolonged rumination. Today, Eli paused. He acknowledged the inconvenience, adjusted plans deliberately, and moved forward without resistance. The work was completed, the disruption accommodated, and the internal storm never fully arose. Another small victory, one not dramatic, yet quietly profound. Walking through the streets later, he observed the rhythm of life from a different perspective. Storefronts gleamed with advertisements, cars honked in predictable patterns, pedestrians shifted constantly in a subtle, self-organized flow. Eli noticed how minor events, an unexpected detour, a momentary clash of pedestrian paths triggered reactions in most people. Some cursed, some flinched, some sighed heavily. He recognized in himself the years of reacting similarly. Now, observation alone carried power, noticing the pull of habit, the friction of expectation, and the quiet ability to choose otherwise. Evening arrived, carrying with it new reflections. Eli settled at his desk with a notebook, recording the day's experiences. The page filled with small notations, pauses taken, observations made, choices exercised. He wrote of impermanence, of the neutrality of events, of the subtle liberation that arises from conscious attention. Each sentence, carefully composed, became an anchor in the mind, a reminder that freedom resides not in changing the external world, but in mastering one's response to it. A friend called unexpectedly. The conversation began with casual greetings, but soon touched on familiar pressures, work frustrations, family demands, the incessant pull of daily life. In the past, Eli would have joined the chorus of complaint, allowed irritation to seep into voice and posture. This time, he listened, acknowledged shared difficulties, and offered perspective without judgment or attachment. He noticed the friend's reactions shift subtly, tension easing. The principle was tangible. One could navigate interactions deliberately, even when circumstances remained fixed and unchangeable. Night walks became a recurring practice. The streets glistened under lamplight, puddles reflecting neon signs, traffic lights, and occasional passerby. Eli moved slowly, deliberately, observing each sensation, the feel of wet pavement under shoes, the crisp evening air against skin, the distant hum of city life. Thoughts arose and receded, worries about work, family, the imposed life change. He observed them as one might observe clouds drifting across the sky, present, real, yet impermanent. He could acknowledge without attachment, note without reaction, and release without loss. During these walks, he reflected on his own history. Decades of yielding to external pressure, of surrendering choice to circumstance, rose briefly like waves against the shore. He noticed old patterns, the rush to react, the obsession with control, the irritation at events beyond influence. Yet now, a subtle difference emerged. Observation, reflection, and deliberate choice allowed him to navigate familiar currents with newfound agency. He could act, pause, and release. In this space, freedom, though quiet, was tangible. Meals became meditative. The chopping of vegetables, the simmering of sauces, the cleaning of dishes, all were deliberate exercises in attention and presence. The repetition, far from mundane, reinforced the principle that control lies in small actions, in conscious effort, in measured response. Life, in its ordinary flow, offered innumerable opportunities to exercise choice. By attending to these minor acts, Eli strengthened the mental and emotional muscles required to meet larger challenges with calm and clarity. Unexpected events continued to arrive, as they always do. A missed delivery, a miscommunication at work, a minor conflict with a neighbor. In each case, Eli paused. He distinguished between what was within his control and what was not. He acted deliberately where possible, releasing concern where influence did not reach. Each instance, small yet persistent, became practice. Each choice reinforced the internal locus of control, building confidence not through external success, but through measured, intentional engagement with life. Reflection extended into the night. Sitting by the window, he watched distant city lights shimmer on wet streets, occasional headlights tracing lines of movement through puddles. Thoughts of the morning's news arose, along with worries about the implications of the imposed decision. Yet he met them differently than before, with observation, acknowledgement, and gentle release. Awareness itself, practiced repeatedly, had become a subtle refuge. Even in uncertainty, even under pressure, a quiet space of choice persisted. As sleep approached, Eli noted a recurring insight. The world would continue to move, indifferent to preference or expectation. Circumstances would arrive without invitation. Life would impose its currents. Yet freedom is neither absence of challenge nor escape from pressure. It is the ability to navigate these currents deliberately, choosing thought, attention, and action with awareness. In this understanding, he found the first seeds of sustained peace. The night passed quietly. Dreams carried fragments of the day, city streets, minor conflicts, reflections on control. But unlike previous dreams, there was no panic, no frantic rush to assert influence over impossible circumstances. Awareness had permeated even the unconscious mind, planting subtle habits of observation, choice, and release. Morning would come again, and with it, new pressures, new decisions, new opportunities to exercise the principle that had begun to root itself. The morning light crept across Eli's apartment, brushing against familiar surfaces, illuminating objects he had long taken for granted. The worn edges of his desk, the subtle scratches on the kitchen counter, the delicate steam rising from a forgotten coffee mug. Today, the world felt quieter, not because the city had slowed, but because his perception had shifted. Each moment, each object, each sound could be noticed, named, and met with deliberate attention. Awareness itself was becoming a tool, a subtle instrument of choice, of internal sovereignty in a world of imposed currents. Eli began his day with the simple rhythm of observation. The smell of coffee, the warmth of the mug against his hands, the soft hum of traffic beyond the window all became a practice of noticing. In the past, these details had gone unacknowledged, background noise to a mind driven by worry and habit. Now, even these minor observations offered grounding. Awareness became a tether to the present, a gentle reminder that he could exercise control in the midst of forces beyond his reach. Walking to work, Eli observed the city in a way he had not before. Storefronts reflected distorted light across wet sidewalks. Pedestrians moved with purpose, some absorbed in conversation, others locked in the rhythm of commuting. A delivery truck navigated between cars with deliberate precision, and a street musician played a repeated, comforting melody on his guitar. Each observation became a practice in separating what he could control from what he could not. Traffic, weather, the pace of life, none of these were within his sphere of influence. His reactions, however, were entirely his own. Mid-morning brought a minor disruption. A colleague arrived unexpectedly with urgent requests, deadlines shifted, and expectations multiplied. In the past, such events would have sparked irritation, anxiety, and even panic. Today, Eli paused. He cataloged what he could influence, drafting a timeline for actionable tasks, delegating when possible, and letting go of what lay beyond reach. Each choice, deliberate and intentional, brought a faint but tangible relief. The internal storm that once accompanied such moments now passed more easily. Awareness alone had begun to transform experience. At lunch, Eli sought solitude in a nearby park. The early autumn air carried the faint scent of fallen leaves, and the occasional gust of wind rustled branches, scattering golden foliage across paths. He observed joggers, parents, and street vendors, noticing patterns of motion, habitual behaviors, and the subtleties of interaction. Even casual observers revealed insight. Some moved with apparent tension, others with fluid grace. He reflected on the difference. Tension and suffering often arose not from external circumstances, but from the internal expectation that life should bend to one's will. A soft drizzle began, and Eli welcomed it, feeling the cool drops against his skin. He imagined the rain as a metaphor for life's uncontrollable forces, persistent, inevitable, yet passing. He could not halt it, nor command it to suit his desires. But he could choose how to experience it, whether to resist or accept, whether to let it dominate thought or exist as neutral observation. The principle, simple in theory, became vivid through direct experience. Returning to the office, Eli encountered further minor irritations, emails arriving out of order, meeting rooms double-booked, unexpected changes in client expectations. In each instance, he paused, cataloged control versus non-control, and acted deliberately on what was within reach. The process required patience and attention. Old habits of immediate reaction surfaced, but recognition of these patterns allowed them to be intercepted before they dictated behavior. Each successful pause strengthened confidence, demonstrating the tangible power of internal choice. By mid-afternoon, Eli received a phone call from a family member discussing a long-standing disagreement. In the past, these conversations had escalated quickly, leaving emotional residue that lingered for days. Today, he listened first, acknowledged emotions, and responded with calm deliberation. He did not attempt to control the other person's behavior, nor insist upon immediate resolution. Instead, he focused on the aspects within his power, his tone, his patience, and the clarity of his communication. The conversation ended amicably, tension diffused, and Eli noted the subtle shift in perspective. Peace arises less from changing others than from mastering oneself. As evening approached, he returned home and engaged in small, deliberate routines. Preparing dinner became an exercise in mindfulness. Each chop of a knife, each stir of a pan, each clean plate placed on the counter reinforced awareness and presence. The ordinary acts of life became training grounds, allowing him to practice the principle of control over thought and action in predictable, manageable contexts. Each success, however minor, reinforced the idea that freedom was found not in altering the world, but in choosing one's stance within it. Night offered a more reflective space. Eli sat by his window, the city's distant lights shimmering on damp streets below. He observed pedestrians, vehicles, and street lamps reflecting in puddles. Each moment offered insight into the interplay of control and circumstance. The city moved independently of his desires, yet he remained capable of choice. He wrote in his notebook observations, reflections, and small victories of deliberate action. The writing was neither prescriptive nor moralistic. It was simply an acknowledgement of practice, a chronicle of subtle mastery over self. Unexpectedly, a sudden power outage plunged the apartment into darkness. The hum of electronics ceased, and the city outside appeared muted. In the past, such disruptions might have elicited frustration or anxiety. Today, Eli lit a candle, observed the warm glow against familiar furniture, and noted the stillness. He chose calm, deliberate action over resistance, and in doing so, experienced a quiet satisfaction. Even unplanned events, he realized, could become arenas for practice, moments to exercise judgment, attention, and acceptance. Later, he received an urgent work message, a last-minute change in project requirements with a tight deadline. Instinctively, old habits of tension and irritation surfaced. Yet awareness remained present. He cataloged what could be influenced his time, his focus, his effort, and let go of what could not the client's ultimate decisions, external market conditions, or unforeseen circumstances. He approached the task deliberately, dividing it into manageable components, prioritizing effectively, and completing the work without undue stress. The exercise, while routine, reinforced the principle that focus on controllable elements is both practical and liberating. Throughout the night, Eli reflected on his journey thus far. Observation, deliberate action, and measured response were no longer abstract concepts, they were part of lived experience. He recalled moments earlier in life when he had allowed circumstance to dictate thought and emotion. He saw patterns of unnecessary suffering, the habitual surrender to expectation, the attachment to outcomes beyond his control. Now, through repeated practice, he began to recognize a subtle difference. He could maintain composure, act intentionally, and release attachment to outcomes while still engaging fully with life. Sleep approached, carrying with it a sense of quiet anticipation. Dreams arose, city streets, work challenges, family interactions. But unlike before, panic did not dominate. Awareness had carried into unconscious hours, embedding subtle habits of reflection, choice, and release. In the darkness, he could feel a continuity of practice, a quiet mastery developing, small yet persistent. The city felt heavier this morning, the weight of commutes, deadlines, and social expectation pressing against the slow hum of dawn. Eli walked through the streets with awareness, feeling the usual currents of urban life. Taxis weaving impatiently, pedestrians brushing past, distant construction breaking the quiet. But now, rather than absorbing these forces unconsciously, he observed them. Each honk, footstep, and muffled conversation was neutral, a fact of the environment. His response, his attention, his judgment, his choice remained entirely his own. Work greeted him with immediate demands. A project had shifted unexpectedly, a new deadline, additional responsibilities, and unclear expectations from management. In the past, he would have felt a surge of anxiety, frustration, and internal resistance. Today, he paused. He listed what could be controlled, the tasks he could complete, the time he could allocate, the clarity of his communication. He listed what could not, client decisions, team delays, sudden market shifts. With this distinction, he approached the day deliberately. Each email, meeting, and phone call was handled calmly, with attention and focus rather than reflexive stress. In the office, colleagues reacted predictably to pressures. Some hurried, voices raised, movements abrupt. Others displayed subtle panic, judgment, or blame. Eli observed silently, noting how surrender to circumstances shaped their experience. He felt gratitude for the clarity of his own practice. Awareness itself had become a shield, a buffer, and a compass. He could navigate even the most chaotic environment with equanimity, not by controlling the world, but by controlling his mind. A particularly challenging interaction arose when a team member approached with complaints about the new timeline. Eli listened fully, resisting the impulse to immediately correct or defend. He acknowledged the concerns, reflected on what actions were within his power, and suggested deliberate steps forward. The conversation concluded with clarity and minimal tension, a quiet victory that reinforced the principle he had begun to embody. Small applications accumulated into a subtle confidence, a lived understanding that agency resided in response, not circumstance. Lunch offered a quiet moment of reflection. Eli walked to a small park, the sun breaking through clouds in warm beams. Leaves swirled across paths, joggers passed steadily, and the faint aroma of street food drifted on the breeze. He observed minor interactions, a parent consoling a child, a dog sniffing the grass with attentive curiosity, friends laughing softly. Each moment served as a mirror, reminding him that internal mastery is independent of external predictability. Awareness of the dichotomy of control allowed him to witness life without becoming swept away by it. The afternoon introduced a larger challenge, an unexpected client change, requiring a rapid pivot in approach and strategy. The instinctive reaction might have been panic or blame. Eli noticed the rising tension, identified the elements he could influence, and set aside those beyond reach. He delegated where appropriate, prioritized tasks, and maintained deliberate focus. Even when complications arose, his mental clarity remained intact. By navigating these challenges through measured response, he experienced firsthand the strength of internal agency. Returning home in the evening, Eli faced family expectations. Calls and messages from relatives highlighted concerns about career choices, lifestyle decisions, and responsibilities he had long deferred. In earlier years, he might have felt resentment, guilt, or pressure to conform. Today, he listened, acknowledged their points, and responded calmly, asserting his own choices without aggression or defensiveness. The practice of discerning control extended into relationships. While he could not dictate their behavior or expectations, he could determine his response, maintain composure, and act in alignment with his values. Dinner was prepared with the same deliberate attention he had cultivated throughout the day. Each step chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, washing utensils became an act of mindfulness. Even ordinary tasks offered opportunity for application, maintaining focus, observing sensations, and practicing patience. The kitchen became a classroom, life itself a teacher of discipline, attention, and intentionality. In these repeated small acts, Eli discovered a quiet power, freedom and peace arising not from altering circumstances, but from mastering response. The night offered another test. An urgent email from work introduced ambiguity and expectation beyond his control. He felt the old tug of tension, irritation, and anxious speculation. Pausing, he categorized what could be influenced and what could not. He acted deliberately where possible, clarifying tasks, outlining steps, and communicating effectively while releasing the remainder. The sense of liberation was tangible. Even in pressure, deliberate engagement with controllable elements created calm. A walk followed, as was now habitual. City lights shimmered in puddles, neon reflected on wet asphalt, and faint sounds of traffic, conversation, and distant construction formed a gentle symphony. He observed, without judgment, small interactions, a group of friends laughing, a cyclist weaving carefully through cars, a stray cat navigating puddles. Life, in its relentless movement, was neutral. Suffering, tension, or frustration arose only when the mind imposed expectation or attachment. Awareness, practiced continuously, became an instrument of choice and liberation. Eli reflected on patterns from earlier life. Years of surrender to circumstance had produced cycles of frustration, anger, and regret. Observing these patterns now, he saw them clearly, without shame or attachment. He recognized old triggers, the sudden shift of plans, interpersonal friction, minor disruptions as neutral events. By acting deliberately, choosing focus, and releasing attachment, he could navigate familiar currents with calm, agency, and measured attention. Each repetition strengthened his capacity to act effectively in more complex situations. Even mundane moments became opportunities for practice. Waiting for a train, navigating a crowded crosswalk, responding to casual comments from colleagues all became exercises in deliberate attention. He noted the impulse to react unconsciously, paused, and chose an intentional response instead. The small victories accumulated, invisible to others, yet profoundly impactful internally. He recognized a principle emerging. Mastery over one's internal state is both practical and transformative, irrespective of external chaos. As the night deepened, Eli sat by his window, city lights flickering against glass, distant horns and voices forming a muted symphony. He reflected on the day, minor crises at work, family pressures, disruptions in routine, and the constant pull of expectation. Yet he had navigated each with awareness, choice, and calm. The dichotomy of control, the focus on what is within one's power, and the release of what is not, was no longer abstract. It was lived, repeated, and internalized. Sleep arrived, carrying dreams colored not by panic or frustration, but by practice. Even unconsciously, he navigated pressures, observed reactions, and exercised choice. Awareness, attention, and deliberate response had become habits, forming a foundation for deeper application. The day's victories, though subtle and private, reinforced a quiet truth. Freedom exists in the measured engagement with life, not in controlling its uncontrollable currents. Morning arrived heavy with urgency. Eli's alarm rang, pulling him into consciousness with a familiar tension, but today he noticed it and did not resist. He lay in bed for several moments, allowing awareness to settle over him like a quiet blanket. The city below stirred with activity. Buses rumbled, car horns blared, and distant construction created its muted percussion. Each sound was neutral, a fact of existence. His judgment and response, entirely his own, would determine whether this cacophony became turmoil or remained background rhythm. The first high-stakes challenge came almost immediately. An urgent work crisis had emerged overnight. A key client had requested a complete reworking of a proposal, demanding solutions and timelines that seemed unreasonable. Eli felt the familiar tug of tension, yet he observed it as one might observe a storm from the shore. Heartbeat, shallow breath, tightening shoulders, all acknowledged without judgment. The decision to react calmly rather than react reflexively was immediate, deliberate, and intentional. He cataloged what he could control: his effort, his time allocation, his clarity of communication. Everything else, the client's approval, unforeseen obstacles, shifting market conditions, was outside his influence. Emails flooded in, each carrying implicit pressure, urgency, and expectation. Colleagues reacted visibly, voices tense, shoulders rigid, gestures sharp. Eli noticed, without judgment, the difference between surrendering to circumstance and exercising agency. He drafted responses deliberately, prioritized actionable tasks, and delegated where possible. Minutes stretched into hours, but awareness remained steady. Each completed task was a small victory, each choice made deliberately, a reaffirmation of the principle he had begun to embody. By mid-morning, a second challenge arose. A team member, frustrated by shifting priorities, voiced sharp criticism. In the past, Eli's instinct would have been defensive, immediate rebuttal, internal tension, judgment of the colleague's motives. Today he paused, listening fully, acknowledging the emotions present, and responding with calm clarity. He diffused potential conflict. The situation resolved without escalation, subtly reinforcing the practical power of measured response over reactive impulse. Awareness was not passive, it was active, intentional, and profoundly liberating. Lunch offered a brief interlude. Eli walked to a quiet park, autumn leaves swirling beneath his feet. He noticed the rhythm of life, joggers moving steadily, parents guiding children, birds navigating branches, the faint scent of damp earth. Even here, lessons presented themselves. Life moves regardless of expectation, and suffering arises from attachment and judgment. Each small observation reinforced the principle. The world remains indifferent, but the mind need not be overwhelmed. Peace emerges in the careful discernment of what lies within one's sphere of influence. The afternoon brought further tests. A sudden system failure at work threatened to derail hours of progress. Impulses for irritation, panic, and blame emerged immediately, but Eli recognized them as habitual responses, not necessities. He cataloged control versus non-control. He could troubleshoot, call necessary support, and communicate clearly. He could not prevent unforeseen technical issues entirely. Acting deliberately within these limits, he navigated the disruption efficiently. By the time resolution arrived, tension had not dominated the process. Observation and intentional action had replaced the usual chaos of reaction. Later, an unexpected family matter arose. A relative called, distressed over a personal crisis. The instinctive response might have been immediate anxiety, guilt, or the compulsion to overcompensate. Instead, Eli paused, listened fully, acknowledged the emotions involved, and determined what actions were realistically possible. Advice was offered calmly, support assured within limits, and release of attachment to outcomes was deliberate. The interaction concluded with clarity and compassion, a subtle demonstration of the principle. Control lies in one's actions, attention, and responses, not in others' choices or circumstances. Evening descended, bringing with it new layers of challenge. A minor neighborhood conflict erupted, a delivery issue, miscommunication, and a brief altercation with a passerby. In previous years, these incidents might have sparked irritation, lingering resentment, or defensive posturing. Today, Eli observed calmly, acted with clarity, and maintained intentional composure. Even small moments of conflict became arenas for deliberate choice. Each encounter reinforced internal agency, demonstrating that the principle of focusing on what one can control applies equally to minor urban frictions as to larger, more consequential pressures. Dinner preparation, once routine, became a continuation of practice. Chopping, stirring, and arranging ingredients were exercises in deliberate awareness. Every motion, every sensation was attended to, reinforcing the distinction between external unpredictability and internal choice. The kitchen was transformed into a training ground for agency. Even ordinary tasks held opportunity for mastery. Repetition, subtle attention, and mindful effort produced a quiet power, imperceptible to the casual observer but profoundly felt internally. Later that night, Eli faced a particularly stressful email, a sudden request to present results at an impromptu meeting with minimal preparation time. The initial instinct was panic and resentment. Recognition of the impulse, however, created space for deliberate response. He organized notes, rehearsed key points, and reminded himself that while he could not control the audience, expectations, or outcomes, he could control clarity, effort, and composure. The presentation was delivered calmly, efficiently, and with confidence, a direct demonstration of the principle in high-stakes application. Following the meeting, Eli reflected quietly by a window overlooking the city. Rain had begun again, tapping against the glass, creating patterns of movement and reflection. Pedestrians moved under umbrellas, taxis navigated slick streets, and distant lights shimmered in puddles. The city was indifferent, its currents unstoppable. Yet he observed a subtle truth. In every interaction, decision, and challenge, he had chosen his response deliberately. Awareness had not been passive. It had been active, guiding, and liberating. Returning home, he wrote in his journal. Notes captured moments of choice, observation, and reflection. Tasks completed, conflicts navigated, and responses exercised deliberately were chronicled not for judgment, but for awareness. Each recorded instance reinforced the practical lesson. Freedom lies in mastery of attention, judgment, and action, not in controlling external events. Small victories, accumulated continuously, formed the foundation for enduring inner calm. Night deepened, carrying with it the quiet satisfaction of repeated practice. Sleep was approached with calm, the mind habituated to deliberate attention and measured response. Dreams were influenced by the day's exercises, city streets, conversations, work challenges, minor emergencies. Yet panic, anxiety, and reflexive agitation were absent. The habits of observation, intentional action, and release of attachment to uncontrollable outcomes had permeated even unconscious thought. By the end of this half of Part 3, Eli had faced high-pressure, unpredictable situations across multiple domains: work crises, family stress, social friction, and urban unpredictability. Each challenge became an opportunity to exercise deliberate choice, attention, and response. The dichotomy of control was no longer theoretical. It was practiced, tested, and internalized. Awareness, focus, and intentional action had become habitual, producing freedom and calm regardless of circumstance. The morning arrived soft and unhurried. The city bathed in muted sunlight filtered through high clouds. Eli awoke without urgency, without the reflexive tension that once defined his mornings. He lingered in bed, observing his thoughts as they arose and passed, recognizing impulses for worry, habit, and expectation. The mind, once a storm of anticipation, was now a quiet garden. Awareness, deliberately practiced over countless mornings, had become a refuge in itself. Breakfast was a slow ritual. Each motion pouring coffee, spreading butter, stirring tea was deliberate, attended, and observed. The simple act of tasting, of noticing texture and warmth, became a practice of gratitude and presence. In the past, he had rushed these moments, oblivious to their rhythm and potential. Today, they were exercises in agency, small, measurable choices that grounded attention and reinforced the principle that control exists within, not in the chaotic currents of life. The city outside was alive with movement, yet Eli navigated it calmly. Commuters hurried, taxi horns blared, and construction noises punctuated the morning air. Each stimulus was neutral. The tension arose only when one's mind imposed urgency or expectation. Eli observed the familiar impulse to react, paused deliberately, and chose measured focus. The path to work, once fraught with impatience and agitation, became a quiet corridor for reflection and practice. Work offered its customary pressures, shifting priorities, unexpected requests, and interpersonal friction. Eli approached each task intentionally, identifying what was within his control, his clarity, his effort, his patience. The rest, the decisions of clients, market conditions, or organizational bureaucracy were observed, acknowledged, and released. The difference was palpable. Whereas prior years had been marked by stress and frustration, today he navigated the same environment with deliberate calm. Each choice, each measured response, reinforced the principle of internal sovereignty. Mid-morning brought a team meeting. Colleagues voiced opinions, disagreements surfaced, and tension rippled subtly through the room. Eli observed without attachment. When the discussion threatened to escalate, he exercised deliberate choice, listening fully, responding calmly, and focusing on actionable solutions. The group dynamic, previously a source of agitation, became a field for practice. Awareness transformed potential conflict into opportunity for measured action, demonstration of patience, and reinforcement of focus on controllable elements. Lunch was solitary in a small, quiet park. Eli walked slowly, absorbing the sights and sounds, leaves rustling, birds calling, joggers moving steadily along paths. Each observation was intentional, a practice of conscious attention. He reflected on his progress. Repeated applications of control had begun to reshape his perception. Situations that once triggered automatic frustration now invited observation. Stress no longer dictated posture or reaction. The mind, habituated through repetition, had begun to embody calm, deliberate choice. The afternoon offered tests of deeper significance. A client called with urgent, unexpected demands, requiring strategic adjustments and immediate feedback. Instinctive reactions, frustration, panic, resentment surfaced briefly. Eli observed these as the afternoon offered tests of deeper significance. A client called with urgent, unexpected demands, requiring strategic adjustments and immediate feedback. Instinctive reactions, frustration, panic, resentment surfaced briefly. Eli observed these as transient phenomena, distinct from his conscious choice. He focused on what could be influenced, crafting clear responses, prioritizing tasks, and communicating deliberately. Everything beyond reach decisions of the client, unforeseen delays, external conditions was acknowledged and released. The outcome was efficient, composed, and stress minimized. Evening brought a more personal challenge. A family discussion arose concerning long-standing expectations and subtle criticism of life choices. Previous years had seen resentment, defensiveness, and internal tension. Today, Eli listened fully, acknowledged emotions, and responded with clarity, calm, and intention. He chose to engage constructively where possible, release attachment where influence did not reach, and maintain composure throughout. The interaction concluded with mutual understanding and minimal friction. Awareness had transformed relational stress into an opportunity for practice, reflection, and demonstration of internal mastery. Returning home, Eli prepared dinner with deliberate care. Each step, from chopping to stirring to cleaning, became a meditation. Sensory experience, sound, texture, aroma was attended to fully, reinforcing the principle of focus on what is controllable. Even in ordinary tasks, repeated practice of awareness, attention, and measured action strengthened mental and emotional habits. Mastery of self, not of circumstance, was the underlying theme. Night walks remained central to practice. Streets glistened from earlier rain, neon signs reflected in puddles, and distant voices punctuated the quiet. Eli moved slowly, observing minor interactions and urban patterns. Pedestrians hurried, cyclists wove through traffic, and stray animals navigated sidewalks with intent. He noted familiar triggers, delays, crowded paths, unexpected interactions, and consciously chose responses: patience, calm observation, and acceptance. Life continued its flow, indifferent to preference, yet he had mastered response within its currents. Reflection extended into personal projects and goals. Eli reviewed progress on professional tasks, daily routines, and personal growth. Past tendencies towards self-criticism and regret surfaced briefly, but awareness intercepted them. He cataloged achievements, noted deliberate choices, and released attachment to outcomes. Growth, he realized, was not measured solely by external success, but by consistency in deliberate, mindful action under varying circumstances. Each small success accumulated, reinforcing freedom, clarity, and calm. Unexpected events continued to appear: a last-minute schedule change, a sudden delivery, or minor interpersonal friction. Each became an opportunity to practice awareness and control. He paused before reacting, identified what could be influenced, and acted deliberately. Everything beyond reach was noted and released. This repeated practice reinforced the foundational lesson. Agency resides not in altering circumstances, but in mastery of attention, judgment, and action. By late evening, Eli sat by his window, journal in hand. The city lights shimmered across wet streets, creating reflections that danced with passing cars and pedestrians. He recorded moments of conscious choice, observation, and deliberate action. Notes were neither moralistic nor prescriptive. They were chronicles of lived practice, subtle victories, and reinforcement of internal sovereignty. Repeated documentation served as both reflection and reinforcement, solidifying habits of awareness, intentionality, and calm under pressure. As sleep approached, Eli noted a subtle truth. The world remained indifferent, its currents relentless, yet freedom, peace, and calm were accessible in the consistent practice of attention and deliberate choice. Life's challenges, work, family, social dynamics, and unexpected events were no longer threats to inner stability. Mastery lay not in altering circumstance, but in exercising agency in perception, thought, and action. Repetition, consistency, and mindfulness had transformed understanding into lived experience. Night deepened, carrying dreams woven from daily practice, conversations, tasks, minor disruptions, and urban rhythm. Yet unlike prior years, panic and stress were absent. Even unconscious thought now reflected awareness, measured response, and internal sovereignty. Awareness had become habit, deliberate action had become instinct. Repeated practice had formed a quiet, unshakable foundation, preparing him for the final phase: sustained integration of insight and mastery across all aspects of life. The city awoke gradually, the muted glow of early sunlight washing over streets, buildings, and sidewalks. Eli rose with quiet awareness, noting the familiar sensations: the stretch of limbs, the warmth of his bed, the rise and fall of breath. Each movement was deliberate, each sensation observed, a practice in mindfulness. The past habitual rush had been replaced by measured presence. Even in mundane acts: washing hands, making coffee, dressing, he exercised conscious choice. Awareness had become routine, a baseline from which deliberate action flowed. Work presented its usual blend of pressure and unpredictability. Meetings, emails, client demands, and internal coordination all arrived in patterns that once triggered agitation and stress. Today, each stimulus was met with measured attention. He noted which elements were within influence: clarity of communication, time management, allocation of effort, and which lay beyond reach: client decisions, organizational bureaucracy, market fluctuations. Acting deliberately where possible and releasing the rest, he navigated the day with calm efficiency. The principle of the dichotomy of control was no longer theoretical. It was habitual, embedded in thought, action, and perception. Mid-morning brought an unanticipated challenge. A client expressed frustration over a miscommunication, pressing for immediate solutions. Instinctive reactions, irritation, defensiveness, panic surfaced briefly, yet awareness intercepted them. Eli cataloged controllable elements: his tone, clarity of explanation, actionable steps to resolve the issue. The rest, client's mood, external circumstances, was beyond influence. Acting deliberately within his control, he delivered calm, reasoned responses. The situation de-escalated, tension diffused, and internal equanimity remained intact. Small victories like this, repeated consistently, reinforced mastery. Lunch offered a meditative interlude. Eli walked through a quiet urban park, observing the world with full attention. Leaves swirled underfoot, children's laughter punctuated the air, joggers maintained steady rhythm, birds navigated branches with instinctive precision. Each observation was neutral, yet profoundly instructive. Life proceeds, indifferent to expectation or desire. Frustration arises from attachment, not circumstance. Awareness of this distinction allowed him to move through daily life without succumbing to habitual stress. Even ordinary moments became practice grounds, training the mind in deliberate attention, patience, and composure. The afternoon intensified the test of mastery. Multiple concurrent tasks arose at work, shifting project priorities, urgent client queries, and internal coordination challenges. In previous years, the accumulation of pressure would have triggered tension, reactive decision-making, and emotional exhaustion. Today, Eli approached each challenge systematically. He separated controllable from uncontrollable elements, acted deliberately within influence, and released the remainder. Every interaction, every decision, every response was executed with awareness. The day's pressures became exercises in deliberate choice rather than triggers for reflexive stress. Evening brought relational challenges. Family members raised expectations, expressed concerns, and occasionally implied criticism of past decisions. In the past, such interactions elicited resentment, defensiveness, and lingering tension. Today, Eli listened fully, acknowledged emotions without attachment, and responded deliberately. He focused on what he could control: his tone, patience, and clarity of communication. He released attachment to outcomes beyond his influence. The interaction, though challenging, became an opportunity for practice, reinforcing the principle that internal sovereignty does not require external compliance. Returning home, he engaged in personal routines with heightened awareness. Dinner preparation, tidying, and minor household management became acts of deliberate mindfulness. Each motion, sound, and sensation was attended to fully, reinforcing internal agency. Even the most mundane tasks were transformed into arenas for practice: patience, presence, and deliberate attention. By consistently exercising awareness in routine moments, Eli fortified resilience for more unpredictable challenges. Night walks continued as habitual reflection. Streets glistened under lamplight, puddles mirrored neon reflections, and distant voices echoed softly through urban canyons. Pedestrians hurried, cyclists weaved skillfully through traffic, and the occasional stray animal navigated obstacles. Familiar triggers, crowding, delays, minor disruptions surfaced briefly, yet awareness intercepted habitual reactions. Patience, calm observation, and deliberate response were chosen instead. Life moved with indifference, yet he navigated its currents with agency, clarity, and composure. Reflection deepened further. Eli reviewed both professional and personal growth, decisions executed with deliberate attention, challenges met with calm focus, habitual stress replaced by measured response. Past patterns of surrender to expectation, tension, and frustration were acknowledged without judgment. Lessons were extracted. Suffering arises not from circumstance, but from attachment, and freedom arises in measured response to what lies within control. Small victories, compounded over months, had solidified internal sovereignty. Unexpected events tested mastery yet again. A sudden technical failure disrupted work processes. A minor neighborhood conflict emerged over delivery miscommunication. A late-night call from a family member requested immediate guidance. Each situation, potentially triggering stress, was met with the same framework: identify controllable elements, act deliberately within them, release the remainder. By approaching challenges this way consistently, Eli experienced profound continuity of calm, clarity, and internal freedom. Writing in his journal became a nightly practice of consolidation. He recorded observations, reflections, and deliberate actions. Entries were neither prescriptive nor judgmental. They chronicled lived practice, subtle victories, and reinforcement of internal sovereignty. By documenting repeated application of the dichotomy of control, Eli strengthened mental habits and created a feedback loop. Reflection informed action, action reinforced awareness, awareness enhanced composure. The practice became cyclical, persistent, and self-reinforcing. Sleep arrived with a sense of quiet satisfaction. Dreams reflected the day's experiences, professional pressures, relational dynamics, urban life, and minor emergencies. Yet unlike previous years, reflexive panic, stress, or agitation was absent. Awareness and deliberate choice had permeated unconscious thought. Even in dreams, the principle of control over response, attention, and action persisted. Habits of internal sovereignty had become fully embedded, guiding behavior, thought, and perception without conscious effort. The journey was complete. Yet completion was not a single moment. It was the accumulation of repeated practice, conscious awareness, and deliberate response over time. Eli had learned, lived, and embodied the principle that control lies not in external forces, but in the measured, mindful, and intentional management of self. In this realization, he discovered lasting inner freedom, clarity of perception, and profound peace. As Eli closed his journal and looked out over the city, he felt a quiet clarity settle within him. The storms of life work, expectations, unforeseen events continued to move around him, as they always had. Yet he had discovered something enduring. Freedom comes not from controlling the world, but from mastering how we meet it. Peace arises from the choices we make in thought, action, and attention. If you've walked alongside Eli through these moments of reflection, challenge, and growth, take this forward in your own life. Notice what is within your control. Release what is not, and allow deliberate, mindful action to guide your path. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing so you can continue exploring journeys like this, where quiet insight meets daily life. Like, comment, and share your reflections. Your experiences and thoughts make this journey richer. And when you're ready, listen to another story to continue practicing awareness, choice, and calm in the world around you. The city still moves, life continues, but the power of choice, the dichotomy of control, remains yours to embrace.